But if I had to articulate what I think your superpower is, it's yes, you can hire a team offshore and you can get a ton out of that team. Like, you know how to manage that team. You've done it for a decade now. Like, you're super good at it. But when I was watching from the outside looking in, you working with managers in America who were going to manage and hire teams offshore and get them to the same level that you were at with that, that's where I look at and say that's a superpower, because it's hard to figure out how to navigate through that if it's just you managing them and trying to make yourself more scalable. But to take someone else and get them into a mindset where they're able to get a high amount of quality work from someone who's in a different country, maybe a language barrier that's there, and to do it predictably and to not fire the person halfway through because they think, oh, I have the wrong person for the job. Because I noticed a trend, and I want to give a little bit more context here. The trend that I notice of people who are operating, it's not just with remote environments or for people who are offshore, it's kind of everywhere, but I would say in particular it's accentuated when you're dealing with a team that's offshore. When you hire the person, you expect them to be able to do the job that it says on their resume that they're able to do. And in 2 weeks that they've started with you, they're not giving you the product that you were hoping for. And they think, oh, I hired the wrong person. Let me go back and try this again. I see something different in you, not having a willingness to develop that talent and then not allowing the leaders that work for you to be in an environment where they are not developing talent. It's like, no, this is the person you need. You need to communicate better. You need to train them better, develop them better. Now that I've thrown all this at you of what I see in you, I think it's a superpower. Where does that come from? Where is your ability to help other people manage these remote workforces and to develop them into like the budding managers that I've seen you do over time? Like, how do you know how to do that?
Well, I think it all goes back to my first management experience in college when I worked at a newspaper and I was promoted to editor-in-chief, and all of a sudden I had a staff of writers below me who were college students, and a lot of them freshmen, and they're doing the freshman partying and all of their homework and trying to get them to actually work, and realizing like they're really talented writers, but it is just trying to communicate to them what I need from them and being strict on deadlines. I would say that's where I really developed those management experiences, and I did it early on in college. So I think that contributed to being able to work with people who just need a lot of direction. And throughout almost every position that I've been in a management position. And so I think over time I just have developed those things, and then it translated to working with offshore employees when I worked at the agency. And that was my first experience doing it. And I remember at first thinking, like, after, messaging back and forth and not getting the results, I'm like, this can't be the right person for this. And then at that point, I had traveled for 2 years. And I remember thinking, like, being lost in South Korea and literally being out in the middle of nowhere at like a bus station trying to figure out how to get back to Seoul. And no one spoke English, and they're trying to help me, and having to sort through that situation of none of us speaking the same language and me being literally like 2 hours out from where I was meant to be. Instead of panicking, I had to figure it out. And then I remembered that situation and I was like, it's not that they don't know what they're doing. It's because I communicated it in a language that's not native to them. And so that's where creating like the design briefs and being very visual, like sending Loom videos to walk through this is what needs to be done, and sending examples of images that I like so that they can compare it. Because a lot of the times it really is, it's the language barrier. And sometimes they're just not interpreting the words the way that you want them to. And so becoming more visual with what you're doing is basically one of the first things that I adapted, was just making sure I use a lot of visuals, Loom videos, over communicating. And then from there, I developed with a lot of the offshore employees that I've worked with a shorthand, where then you don't need to do that anymore, because they
Sure.
get to know you and they get to know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I think instead of just giving up right away on someone and thinking it's their lack of skills, it's not. It's just they are used to using different language than you, and that doesn't make them less smart than you. Because I'm sure if I was trying to communicate in a different language that I wasn't native to, I would not sound like I knew what I was talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's just being very understanding and having the patience, and then developing that relationship. And that's when you can create that shorthand with them, where you don't have to over explain everything.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen some of the creative briefs you talk about where it's very clearly over explaining. And it was a lesson for me from seeing that of, if you want to get the most out of a remote worker who maybe doesn't speak the same language, or a virtual assistant, like stipulating exactly what you want with a video of how, like what it should look like. Here's the template I made for you. Fill this in. This is the drive I want it to go into when it's done.
Yeah.
And this is the vision for it, and that why, and articulating all of that so that you get the right result back the first time. Like, that's special. And I feel like I'm seeing a system that you iterated on to come to the solution of, like, this is what works.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't that way when you first started.
For sure.
And that design brief now that we use across our company,
Yeah.
that it's I'm seeing results that come through right the first time, when I know that wasn't the case. And so when I branch out and I start a new company and we're hiring offshore again, and the managers are not able to get the same level of product back the first time or the 10th time from the same types of teams, I look at that and I say, like, there's something really special about how you were doing it and how you taught your managers how to do it. So I had a conversation with one of my team members in the new business not even a week ago, and he was super frustrated. He came in, he's like, we've got the wrong team. Like, I have to do 70% of the work to get them to give me what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
What do you say to that?
Kind of what I mentioned before about upfront investment. So with an employee, when you first hire them, you have to realize that the first 3 months, typically that ramp up period, you're going to be doing most of the work. You're going to be checking every little thing. You're going to be putting more time into your job, into the job in general, than you did before you hired them. And that's when you get pissed off. You're like, why am I paying this person? Now I'm putting more time. It's supposed to save me time.
Yeah.
Well, it typically takes any employee really 90 days to ramp up and to fully understand a job and to be able to have some autonomy. So I say, be patient. If you're not giving someone 90 days to ramp up, then you're probably just being a dick.
Yeah.
And so I think being very hands-on, over communicating, and giving tons of feedback, like lots of detailed feedback in the beginning, is going to save you, because they're going to learn what you like, what you're looking for, to be able to implement that in the future, and then to start being able to build on that themselves and come up with their own ideas, because now they know how your mind works and what you're looking for.
Yeah. I gave him much the same answer, except I did it more so in like analogy format, where it's like, you ever like taught a kid how to do a puzzle?
Yeah.
You know, like they have no idea where to even get started. And it gets to a point where you have to do like 90% of the work. Like, hey, 5-year-old, like put the piece here, now push it down. Like, you see how that works?
Yeah.
And years later, they come home from school, you come home from work, and the puzzle is like fully done. And you see that, okay, you know how to do this now. But it takes so much time for them to be able to learn. And at first, like, you have to do for them, show them what right looks like.
Yeah.
And then you do it with them. And you give them a little bit of leeway and say, hey, like, you do this corner over here, like, I'll do the rest of it. And slowly over time, like 2 years goes by, and they know exactly what you want.
Yeah.
I've seen it with my own, my personal assistant, executive assistant, who there have been so many times over the last 2 years that she's been working with me that people have said, well, if I had Jazz, her name is Jazz. If
Yeah.
I had Jazz, if I had Jazz, like I'd be able to do that too.
Yeah.
If I had someone who was as competent and as good as she is, and she is like super competent and really good at that.
There
But
was a
what
lot
I
of
always
upfront
tell them,
effort.
oh my goodness,
Yeah, I
like
remember that.
those first like 3 months,
Yeah.
to your point, I put my daughter to sleep. She's done for the day. I go back to work now because it's 9 p.m. California time. That means that it's noon in the Philippines where
Yeah.
Jazz is at. And we would get on like, either a recorded call or we would hop on a live Zoom and do training like every single night for those first 3 months. And so it's no surprise then that 90 days later, she becomes like the rock star. It
Yeah.
doesn't take away from her competency,
Right.
but she was invested in heavily.
Yes.
And so for someone else to look at that and say, well, my assistant started a week ago and they suck.
Well, yeah.
You didn't put any work in yet.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
It's
to
kind of like,
develop them.
yeah, even with like a sales role, do you expect to hire someone in a sales position and them close a deal their first month? No, they need to ramp up to that point where they know the product and they know the customer. And it is the same for any position. And I'd say more so for offshore employees because you're learning to speak in your own kind of like language, like a middle ground for the two of you,
Yeah.
because English isn't their native languages. And even I've worked with, people from the Philippines who speak really good English, but it's still not their native language. So as I said, like just overtraining in the beginning is going to help nurture that relationship and that employee to where you then don't have to be checking in on them daily to see if they need help or,
Yeah.
you know.
But it's more so that mindset of the manager who understands that, hey, even though your resume says you're good at this job, you're not going to be good at doing it my way until I teach you how to do it my
'cause,
way.
Yeah, everybody has their own way of doing things. And that's like any new company you work at, you're like, I did this at my last company, but we did it differently.
Yeah.
And you're learning your new company and you're learning that new position and those new personalities around you. So it's like we all go through it. I think just when you're in a management perspective or position, you lose perspective of that, especially if
Yes.
you've been at your company or in your position for years.
Yep.
You forgot what it's like to be new somewhere.
Well, I think that's a problem with managers in general is that they look at it and say, well, your resume said you could do this job.
Yeah.
You're not doing it very well.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference of having someone make an investment in you to show you, I'm looking for it to be done this way. Like, where's their equivalent of your design brief that says, do it this way? Here's a video. Here's an example. Put it here when you're done, and then come talk to me and we'll go look over it. Like, that person is developing the person who they want to be. I want to ask you quickly about delivering harsh feedback, because I think that you've been in a position in your agency where you're managing graphic designers and people who are making listings where it's high stakes. Like you're trying to compete on either Amazon or Shopify or somewhere else on the internet where these images have to be bangers. They have to hit. So to get the right quality product out of it as you're developing that person, I know it requires harsh feedback from someone who's proud of the work that they're handing you. And I want to know from your perspective how you go about hitting the hammer home, like hitting the concept home that I hate what I'm looking at. I know you're proud of it, but it's nothing like what I want it to look like.
Yeah.
How do you do that and accomplish that in a way that doesn't hurt morale?
So I don't like the word harsh feedback. I would say constructive. And that's what you have to make sure is that you're, let's say an image you don't like the font. Instead of being like, this font is ugly, you say, I was actually picturing we use a font like this, and attaching an image of the font you were picturing. This color doesn't match. Okay, well, what color were you envisioning? So giving more a clear picture, or as I said, providing more images in the beginning that show what you're looking for. Because if you just tell them, I don't like this, what direction do they have? You need to say what you don't like about it in a nice way, and then give them an example of what you like about a different image or a different font, a different color, a different lifestyle photo. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'm creating photos for your brand. We had like stock photos of like really creepy, like looking women in like a bathtub that are very like sensual. We're trying to sell soap. Like this is too sexual for Amazon. And, a part of me wanting to just shake the person and be like, why do you think this is appropriate? But
Yeah.
like giving them examples of what a woman bathing maybe is appropriate and what's not, and not freaking out on them, because to me it seems obvious that this is not a good image to use,
Yeah.
but it's not obvious to everybody. And as I said, there's always that cultural barrier. Like in Asia, they do use more sensual advertising. So they're a little, I would say, maybe more numb to that. Like I remember seeing things for like massage, like going to get massages in Asia. That was like, that looks very sexual to me.
Yeah,
But like you have to remember that, yeah, with everybody, even if you're working with a US employee, there could be cultural differences that tell them like, this is a great lifestyle image. And in your mind, you're like, this is not what I'm looking for. Well, show them what you're looking for.
It's amazing the perspective differences, even of people of the same country, of what I was thinking about when I said it versus what you thought about when you heard me say it. And to write someone off as like, well, nobody in their right mind should have thought that.
Yeah.
It's actually an excuse, I think, for you as the leader or manager didn't communicate what you wanted and you didn't like the vision you got back.
Exactly.
But take responsibility for not communicating that vision.
Yeah.
And so I like what you said, to like constructively and tactfully give that feedback to inform what the vision should have been. And I'm someone who sometimes it's easier for me to see something I hate and then tell you, now that I've seen that, it's still better than a blank slate, because now I know what I'm looking for.
Yeah, you have a jumping off point from there.
Yeah.
You know what you don't want at this point, and you can kind of construct it to be more what you're looking for.
Yeah.
So that's why I try not to get like bummed out when, I'm requesting a product design for a new bag of coffee and I get it back and I'm like, oh, this is not what my brain was picturing. But I'm like, now I have a reference point. Like, this is what they thought. Now I can work with this and tweak it to the point of, so like product design takes a lot of iterations. You're never getting back what your brain had in it in the beginning, even when you're providing examples. And one thing is like making sure when you provide an example, you're not saying, because what I've done with sending offshore employees design briefs for product design, and I'm like, I give them an example of a candle and then they just copy exactly what that candle looked like. I'm like, no, like this is direction for you. This is what I think is pretty, but we can't just go copy another product. This looks exactly like our competitor.
Yeah.
So again, like the communication up front of, this is an example of, but please do not copy paste what I'm sending you right now.
Last question. One piece of advice for someone who's going into a role where they know they're going to have to hire a remote work team. What should they be thinking about as they go into that role to be successful in it?
I think just, it's a tough one. I guess just thinking about, I don't know where to go with that.
Think about someone who's one of your managers, for instance, at think of someone like a Jackie who's coming into that role. What do you tell her about being successful working in that environment and what she needs to know to prepare her for success?
So patience is the biggest one. And that is one that I had to really drill home with her, is because at first it was very frustrating for her. Like, what are these images? What are they coming up with? Why are they thinking this? And it was like, you have to have patience and go through that process, because that was her first experience managing someone. And so I think when I'm, I've trained up a lot of managers at this point, and the biggest thing actually I've taught them is having patience with their direct reports, because nobody is easy at first. Like, everybody needs that time and that attention, especially when you're working with offshore employees. So I think that is my biggest advice, is just having the patience to get through that first 3 months. And then I think after that point, you have enough data to think, okay, maybe this person isn't right for it. I've done everything I can. As long as you feel confident that you've done everything you can to provide feedback, to provide training, and to, in the beginning, hold their hand because that's what they deserve to reach success. If you've done that and they're still not executing, then you consider moving on. And that's just the investment. That's what being a business owner is. It's what being a manager is. Not every employee works out. I've had to lay off a number of employees, and it breaks your heart every time, even if they sucked at their job. Nobody wants to do it, but that is part of being a business owner, is you have to make those tough decisions.
The good with the bad. And if I can sum up our conversation, it's really whether you're getting great results out of working with an offshore team or living the life you're living that people are envious of, they're only seeing that finished result. They're not seeing all the stuff that went in to making that happen. And it's something to aspire to for sure,
Yeah.
but also nothing replaces going through those steps yourself to make it happen.
Yeah.
So awesome. Thanks for doing this. This was great.
Yeah.
And we'll get some good out of it.
Yeah, it's fun.
Fantastic.